Have you ever wondered what it feels like to hear your own father tell medical staff that your life isn't worth saving? I never imagined I'd find out. But on a cold Tuesday evening in Chicago, as I lay bleeding on a hospital gurney, those exact words would echo through the emergency room, words that would change everything between us forever. This is the story of how a car accident revealed the devastating truth about my relationship with my father, and how one nurse's courage would finally give me the recognition I'd been fighting for my entire life. But before we begin, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us where you're listening from. The rain was coming down in sheets that Tuesday evening as I drove home from St. Mary's Medical Center. After 18 hours of back-to-back surgeries, my hands still trembled slightly from the adrenaline. I just saved 3 lives that day: a construction worker with internal bleeding, a teenager who'd overdosed, and an elderly woman whose heart had stopped twice on the operating table. As the chief of emergency medicine at one of Chicago's busiest hospitals, days like this were becoming routine, but they never got easier. I was thinking about the woman's family, how grateful they'd been when I emerged from surgery to tell them she'd pulled through when the semi-truck ran the red light. Time slowed to a crawl. I saw the massive grille of the 18-wheeler bearing down on my Honda Civic's driver's side. I tried to swerve, but the wet asphalt offered no grip. The impact felt like being hit by a building, a thunderous crash that turned my world upside down, literally. When the spinning stopped, I was hanging upside down, held in place by my seatbelt. Blood dripped steadily from somewhere on my head, pooling on the car's roof below me. My left arm hung at an unnatural angle, and every breath sent sharp spikes of pain through my ribcage. But I was conscious, and that meant I was alive. Help! Someone help! I tried to shout, but my voice came out as barely a whisper. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth. Through the spiderwebbed windshield, I could see people gathering. Someone was calling 911. The truck driver was out of his cab, pacing frantically and talking rapidly into his phone. "Yeah, I hit a car. No, they're trapped. Send everything you got." 20 minutes later, the jaws of life were cutting through my car like it was made of aluminum foil. The paramedics worked efficiently, talking to me constantly to keep me conscious. "What's your name, ma'am?" the lead EMT asked as they carefully extracted me from the wreckage. "Dr. Sarah Mitchell," I managed to say, though speaking sent waves of pain through my chest. "You're a doctor? Where do you practice?" "St. Mary's. Emergency medicine. I'm the department chief." The EMT's eyebrows shot up. "Well, Doc, we're taking you to Northwestern Memorial. St. Mary's trauma unit is backed up tonight. Don't worry, we'll take good care of you." Northwestern Memorial. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was being taken to our biggest competitor, a hospital where I trained as a resident nearly 15 years ago. As they loaded me into the ambulance, I wondered if anyone there would remember Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the young resident who'd worked 100-hour weeks and slept in on-call rooms for 3 years before transferring to St. Mary's for my emergency medicine fellowship. The ride to Northwestern was a blur of sirens, radio chatter, and increasingly concerning vital signs. I could feel myself slipping in and out of consciousness despite the EMT's efforts to keep me alert. My blood pressure was dropping, and the pain in my chest was getting worse. Internal bleeding, probably from the spleen or liver. I'd seen enough trauma cases to know the signs. "Stay with us, Doc," the EMT kept saying. "We're almost there." As we pulled into Northwestern's ambulance bay, I caught a glimpse of the familiar red brick building where I'd spent some of the most challenging years of my life. The last thing I remembered before losing consciousness was being wheeled through the automatic doors, past the same nursing station where I'd once spent countless nights charting patient progress and drinking terrible coffee. When I woke up, I was in a trauma bay, surrounded by the controlled chaos of a level 1 emergency room. Nurses moved efficiently around me, hanging 4 bags and checking monitors. A young resident was examining my pupils with a pen light, and I could hear someone calling out my blood pressure numbers. Not good. "She's coming around," a nurse said. "Ma'am, can you hear me? You've been in a car accident. You're at Northwestern Memorial Hospital." I tried to speak, but my throat felt like sandpaper. "Water," I croaked. "Not yet, honey. We need to get some tests done first. Can you tell me your name and date of birth?" "Sarah Mitchell. April 15th, 1985. The resident looked up from his chart. "Dr. Mitchell? Are you Sarah Mitchell, the ER chief at St. Mary's?" Before I could answer, a commotion erupted near the trauma bay entrance. A voice I hadn't heard in over 2 years cut through the medical chatter like a knife. "Where is she? Where's my daughter?" My father had arrived. Richard Mitchell stormed into the trauma bay with the same commanding presence that had intimidated me my entire life. At 68, he still cut an imposing figure. 6 feet tall, silver hair perfectly styled despite the late hour, wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. He was everything I'd never been able to live up to in his eyes. Successful, wealthy, and completely convinced of his own superiority. "Mr. Mitchell?" The resident approached him cautiously. "I'm Dr. Patterson. Your daughter was in a serious accident, but she's stable now." My father's eyes swept over me dismissively, taking in the blood-stained hospital gown, the various tubes and monitors attached to my body, and the obvious signs of trauma. His expression didn't change. No relief, no concern, just the same cold calculation I'd seen whenever he looked at me. "How bad is it?" he asked, but his tone suggested he was asking about a stock report rather than his daughter's life. "She has multiple injuries, possible internal bleeding, a broken arm, several fractured ribs, and a concussion. We're preparing her for emergency surgery to address the internal bleeding." "Surgery?" My father's voice sharpened. "How much is this going to cost?" Dr. Patterson looked taken aback. "Sir, your daughter's life is in danger. The surgery is necessary too." "I understand that." My father cut him off. "But I want to know what we're looking at financially. She has insurance, but there are always additional costs." I tried to sit up, wincing at the pain. "Dad, I can handle my own medical bills. I'm a doctor, remember?" He turned to look at me for the first time since entering the room, and his expression was as cold as I remembered. A doctor at a public hospital. Not exactly what I'd call financially successful. The resident and nurses exchanged uncomfortable glances. Family drama wasn't uncommon in emergency rooms, but the obvious tension between us was making everyone uncomfortable. "Mr. Mitchell," Dr. Patterson said diplomatically, "perhaps we should focus on your daughter's treatment right now. The financial aspects can be sorted out later." "No," my father said firmly. "I want to understand exactly what's involved before any procedures are done. What are the risks of the surgery?" Dr. Patterson looked at me, then back at my father. "Well, any surgery carries risks, but without it, the internal bleeding could be fatal. We're looking at a success rate of about 90% for this type of procedure." 90%, my father repeated, as if he were calculating odds on an investment. "And the 10%? Sir, I'm not sure I understand what you're asking." My father's next words hit me like a physical blow. "I'm asking what happens if the surgery fails. What happens if she doesn't make it?" The trauma bay went silent except for the steady beeping of my heart monitor. Even the nurses had stopped what they were doing to stare at him. "Dad!" I whispered, not quite believing what I was hearing. He didn't look at me. Instead, he addressed Dr. Patterson directly. "I need to know, because I'll be the one making decisions if something goes wrong. I'm her next of kin, and frankly, I'm not sure it's worth the expense and emotional investment if the odds aren't better." Dr. Patterson's jaw dropped. "Sir, are you saying you wouldn't want us to proceed with life-saving surgery?" "I'm saying I want to understand all the options before committing to anything expensive and potentially futile." A nurse named Janet, I could see her name tag, stepped forward. She was an older woman, probably in her 50s, with kind eyes that were now blazing with indignation. "Mr. Mitchell, I think there's been some misunderstanding. This is your daughter we're talking about." "I'm well aware of who she is," my father replied coldly. "And I'm also aware that she's made choices in her life that have consistently disappointed me. She threw away a promising career in corporate law to become a doctor at a public hospital. She's never married, never given me grandchildren, and has basically wasted every opportunity one provided for her." The words came crashing down on me like the truck that had hit my car. Here I was, lying broken and bleeding, and my father was conducting a cost-benefit analysis of my life. After all these years, after medical school, after becoming a department chief, after saving countless lives, I was still just a disappointment to him. "She could have been a partner at a major law firm by now," he continued, speaking about me as if I weren't lying right there. Instead, She's working 100-hour weeks for a fraction of what she could have made, dealing with drug addicts and homeless people. It's not the life I wanted for her. Dr. Patterson looked like he wanted to crawl under a rock. Mr. Mitchell, with all due respect, your daughter is a highly respected physician. She's the chief of emergency medicine at St. Mary's Hospital. My father waved dismissively. A public hospital. It's charity work, not real medicine. That's when Janet stepped closer to my bed, her voice shaking with controlled anger. Sir, I think you need to understand something about your daughter before you make any decisions about her care. I understand perfectly well who my daughter is, my father said curtly. No, Janet said firmly. I don't think you do. Janet positioned herself between my father and my bed, her stance protective and determined. In her 25 years as a nurse at Northwestern Memorial, she'd seen plenty of difficult family situations, but nothing quite like this. Mr. Mitchell, she said, her voice steady despite the anger I could see in her eyes. I think you need to sit down for this conversation. I prefer to stand, my father replied dismissively. And I prefer to get on with whatever decisions need to be made so I can get home. I have an early meeting tomorrow. Janet looked at Dr. Patterson, who nodded almost imperceptibly. She took a deep breath and turned back to my father. Sir, do you have any idea what your daughter does for a living? I mean, really does. She's a doctor at a public hospital, as I said. It's not rocket science. She's not just a doctor, Janet said, her voice rising slightly. She's Dr. Sarah Mitchell. Do you know what that name means in the city? My father's expression remained unchanged. It means she's my daughter who chose to waste her potential. I watched Janet's hands clench into fists at her sides. Your daughter, Mr. Mitchell, is one of the most respected emergency physicians in the entire state of Illinois. She's published over 50 research papers on trauma medicine. She's developed new protocols for treating cardiac arrest that are now used in hospitals across the country. She saved more lives than you could count in a lifetime. All very admirable, I'm sure, my father said dryly, but it doesn't change the fact that she could have made 10 times the money in corporate law. Dr. Patterson finally found his voice. Sir, perhaps money isn't the only measure of success. Everything is about money, young man. Success, respect, influence. It all comes down to financial achievement. That's something my daughter never understood. Janet stepped closer to him, and I could see she was struggling to maintain her professional demeanor. Mr. Mitchell, 3 months ago, your daughter saved the life of Congressman Bradley's 8-year-old grandson. The boy had been hit by a car, and every other hospital in the city said there was nothing they could do. Your daughter operated for 14 hours straight and pulled him through. I'm sure the family was grateful, my father said with a shrug. Grateful? Janet's voice cracked slightly. They established a research fund in her honor. $2 million to continue her work on pediatric trauma care. For the first time, my father looked slightly interested. $2 million! Last year, Janet continued, she was offered the position of Chief of Emergency Medicine at Johns Hopkins. Do you know what that position pays? I assume it's more than whatever she makes at that public hospital. $400,000 a year, plus research funding. She turned it down. My father's eyebrows rose slightly. She turned down $400,000 a year? She turned it down because she wanted to keep working with underserved populations. She said the people who come to St. Mary's need her more than the wealthy patients at Hopkins. I could see my father processing this information, trying to reconcile it with his image of me as a failure. But Janet wasn't finished. 2 weeks ago, she said, your daughter was featured on the cover of Emergency Medicine Today as Physician of the Year. The article called her the most innovative emergency medicine doctor of her generation. I don't read medical magazines, my father said curtly. Maybe you should, Janet shot back. Because if you did, you'd know that your daughter is famous in medical circles. She's given keynote speeches at conferences around the world. Medical students compete for the chance to work with her. Other doctors fly in from other countries just to observe her techniques. Dr. Patterson nodded enthusiastically. Dr. Mitchell, I have to say, your daughter is something of a legend here at Northwestern. When I was in medical school, we studied her research on emergency cardiac protocols. She revolutionized the way we approach sudden cardiac arrest. She also, Janet continued, her voice getting stronger, volunteers at 3 free clinics on her days off. She's personally trained over 200 medical residents. She's written textbooks that are used in medical schools across the country. And she's done all of this while maintaining one of the highest patient survival rates in the country. My father was quiet for a moment, and I could see him struggling with this new information. Finally, he spoke. If she's so successful, why doesn't she act like it? Why does she drive an old Honda instead of a BMW? Why does she live in that tiny apartment instead of buying a house in the suburbs like a normal successful person? Because, Janet said quietly, she donates 60% of her salary to medical charities. She funds free medical care for people who can't afford it. She pays for medical school scholarships for students from low-income families. She's probably given away more money in the last 5 years than most people make in a lifetime. The trauma bay fell silent again. I could see my father processing all of this, trying to fit it into his worldview where success was measured only in personal wealth and status symbols. She never told me any of this, he said finally, and for the first time, there was a crack in his cold demeanor. When would she have told you? Janet asked pointedly. When was the last time you had a real conversation with her? When was the last time you asked about her work instead of criticizing her choices? My father didn't answer, but I could see the question hit home. When was the last time? I tried to remember, but came up empty. Every conversation we'd had in the past 5 years had been him lecturing me about my life choices or comparing me unfavorably to his friends' children who'd gone into business or law. Dr. Patterson cleared his throat. Mr. Mitchell, I think what Nurse Janet is trying to tell you is that your daughter isn't just another patient. She's Dr. Sarah Mitchell. When other doctors have medical emergencies, they specifically request to be treated by her. She saved the lives of judges, senators, police officers, teachers, homeless people. It doesn't matter to her. Every life is worth saving. She's a doctor other doctors call when they don't know what to do, Janet added. She's the one they bring the impossible cases to, the patients everyone else has given up on. And somehow, she finds a way to save them. My father finally looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since he'd arrived. I could see confusion in his eyes, as if he was seeing a stranger instead of his daughter. Is this true? He asked me directly. I nodded weakly. It's my job, Dad. It's what I do. But why didn't you tell me about the awards, the recognition, the research? Because you never asked, I whispered. Every time I try to talk to you about my work, you change the subject or tell me about some lawyer making partner at a big firm. I stopped trying to share it with you years ago. The monitors around my bed started beeping more rapidly as my blood pressure dropped again. Dr. Patterson immediately stepped forward. We need to get her to surgery now, he said urgently. Mr. Mitchell, we need your consent for the procedure. My father stared at me for a long moment, and I could see years of missed opportunities and misunderstandings reflected in his eyes. Do whatever you need to do, he said quietly. Save her. As they wheeled me toward the operating room, I caught a glimpse of my father slumping into a chair in the waiting area, his head in his hands. For the first time in my adult life, he looked vulnerable, human even. But I didn't have time to process what had just happened. The anesthesia was already pulling me under, and the last thing I remembered was thinking about how strange it was to be on this side of an emergency surgery. I'd been in hundreds of operating rooms over the years, but always as the doctor in charge, the one making life and death decisions. Now I was the patient, completely helpless and dependent on others to save my life. It was a humbling experience, even in my semi-conscious state. The surgery took 4 hours. I learned later that they'd found significant internal bleeding from a lacerated spleen and liver damage, plus complications from the broken ribs that had punctured my lung. Dr. Harrison, Northwestern's chief trauma surgeon, told me afterward that it had been touch and go for a while, but they'd managed to repair everything successfully. When I woke up in the ICU, my father was sitting beside my bed. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the few hours I'd been in surgery. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit was wrinkled, and his eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion, or maybe something more. How are you feeling? He asked softly when he saw my eyes open. Like I got hit by a truck, I managed to say, my voice hoarse from the breathing tube they'd removed. He didn't smile at my weak attempt at humor. Instead, he leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." I nodded, though even that small movement made my head throb. "Why didn't you ever tell me about your work? The real work, I mean. The awards, the research, the recognition you've received." I closed my eyes, trying to gather the energy to explain something I'd been thinking about for years. "Do you remember when I graduated from medical school?" I asked. "Of course. You were top of your class. Do you remember what you said to me at the graduation ceremony?" He was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I'm not sure." "You said, 'Well, at least now you can marry a real doctor and live comfortably.' You didn't congratulate me on my achievement. You didn't ask about my plans for residency. You immediately started talking about how I could use my medical degree to attract a wealthy husband." I could see the memory coming back to him, and his face flushed with what might have been shame. "When I told you I was going into emergency medicine instead of dermatology or plastic surgery, you said I was choosing the hardest path for the least reward. When I became chief resident, you asked why I was working so hard for a position that didn't pay extra. When I got the job at St. Mary's, you said it was a stepping stone to something better." My father sat back in his chair, looking stunned. "I thought I was encouraging you to reach higher. You were telling me that nothing I did would ever be good enough unless it made me wealthy or gave me status in your social circle. So I stopped sharing my successes with you because I knew you'd find a way to diminish them." We sat in silence for several minutes, the only sounds a steady beeping of my monitors and the hustle and bustle of the ICU around us. "I had no idea," he said finally. "I thought you were just settling, giving up on your potential." "Dad, I save lives every day. I've helped develop medical procedures that are saving lives around the world. I've trained doctors who are now saving lives in hospitals from California to New York." "How is that settling?" He rubbed his face with both hands, looking more tired than I'd ever seen him. "I guess I just never understood. In my world, success means money and status. I built my law firm from nothing, made millions of dollars, earned the respect of judges and politicians. That's how I measured achievement. But that's not the only way to measure success, Dad. I'm starting to realize that," he said quietly. "That nurse, Janet, she told me things about you that I never knew. She said you've saved over 1,000 lives in your career. It's closer to 1,500, actually." His eyes widened. 1,500 people are alive today because of you?" "Because of my team," I corrected. "Medicine is a team sport. But yes, 1,537 to be exact. I keep track." "How do you keep track of something like that?" "Every patient we lose, I review the case to see what we could have done differently. Every patient we save, I remember why I became a doctor in the first place. The numbers matter because every number represents a person, a family, a future that might not have existed without intervention." My father leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "I've never saved anyone's life." "That's not true. You've helped people with legal problems, fought for justice, protected people's rights. It's not the same thing. You literally bring people back from the dead. And you've built something lasting, too. Your law firm employs over 200 people. Those are families with incomes, health insurance, security, because you built something from nothing." He looked at me with surprise. "I never thought you paid attention to my work." "Of course I did. You're my father. I wanted your approval just as much as you wanted me to be successful. The difference is I understood what you did and respected it, even if it wasn't the path I chose." Just then, Janet walked into the ICU room to check my vitals. She smiled when she saw I was awake and talking. "How are you feeling, Dr. Mitchell?" "Much better, thanks to all of you. Janet, I want to thank you for what you said to my father earlier. That couldn't have been easy." She glanced at my father, then back at me. "Honey, I've been a nurse for 25 years, and I've never seen anything like what happened in that trauma bay. Your father was ready to let you die because he thought you weren't successful enough. I couldn't let that stand." My father winced. "I wasn't going to let her die. I was confused and angry and—" "Mr. Mitchell," Janet said firmly, "your daughter is a hero. Not just to her patients, but to everyone who works in emergency medicine. Do you know that medical students apply to work at St. Mary's specifically because of her? She's trained half the emergency medicine doctors in this city." "I'm learning that I know very little about my daughter's actual life," my father admitted. Janet softened slightly. Well, it's never too late to learn. She's got a week of recovery ahead of her. Maybe you could use that time to actually talk to each other. After Janet left, my father and I sat quietly for a while. Finally, he spoke. Tell me about your work. Really tell me. I want to understand. So I did. For the next hour, I told him about the adrenaline rush of saving someone who comes in with no pulse. I explained how we developed new protocols for treating overdoses that had reduced deaths by 30%. I described the satisfaction of teaching young doctors how to make split-second decisions that could mean the difference between life and death. I told him about Mrs. Rodriguez, the cleaning lady who'd had a heart attack in our hospital lobby, and how we'd brought her back after 12 minutes of CPR. I explained how her teenage daughter had gone on to become a nurse because of that experience. I talked about the homeless veteran who'd come in with pneumonia and how we'd not only treated his medical condition, but connected him with housing services and job training. Every patient has a story, I said, and every save creates ripple effects that touch dozens of other lives. My father listened intently, asking questions that showed he was really trying to understand. For the first time in years, we were having a real conversation, not just him lecturing me about my choices. I owe you an apology, he said finally. Several apologies, actually. Dad! No, let me say this. I've been a terrible father to you. I was so focused on what I thought success should look like that I completely missed what you were actually accomplishing. You've become everything I should have wanted in a daughter, compassionate, brilliant, dedicated to something bigger than yourself. And instead of being proud of you, I've spent years criticizing you for not fitting into my narrow definition of achievement. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, partly from the pain medication, but mostly from hearing words I'd waited 35 years to hear. I don't need you to be proud of me anymore, Dad. I've learned to be proud of myself. But I am proud of you, he said, his own voice breaking slightly. I'm incredibly proud of you. I just wish it hadn't taken almost losing you for me to realize it. Over the next week, as I recovered in Northwestern Memorial's ICU and then a regular room, my father visited every day. Not the obligatory 10-minute visits I'd expected, but hours-long conversations where we really talked for the first time in years. He brought my favorite coffee from a cafe near his office and sat beside my bed while I told him about my patients. I showed him medical journals with my published research, and he read every article, asking questions that proved he was genuinely trying to understand my work. This paper on emergency cardiac protocols, he said on day 3, holding up a copy of the Journal of Emergency Medicine. It says your techniques have been adopted by over 300 hospitals nationwide. 347, last time I checked, I said, adjusting my position in the bed. My ribs were still sore, but the internal bleeding had stopped, and I was healing well. That means thousands of people have been saved using methods you developed. Methods my team and I developed, I corrected. I couldn't have done any of this research without the nurses, residents, and other doctors I work with. You always deflect credit, he observed. Even now, you're sharing recognition with others. Because it's true. Medicine isn't a solo practice. Every life we save is the result of dozens of people working together. He was quiet for a moment, then said, I've been thinking about what Janet said, about you donating most of your salary to charity. Is that really true? I nodded. I make enough to live comfortably. The extra goes to places that need it more than I do. But you could have a house, a nice car, take vacations. I do take vacations. Last year I spent 2 weeks in Guatemala teaching emergency medicine techniques to doctors in rural hospitals. It was the best vacation I've ever had. My father shook his head in amazement. I've been so wrong about you. All these years, I thought you were wasting your potential, but you've been using it in ways I never even considered. On day 4, Dr. Harrison stopped by during one of my father's visits. He'd been checking on my progress daily, and we developed a good rapport. Dr. Mitchell, I have to tell you, it's been an honor having you as a patient, he said. I've read your research on trauma protocols, and I've actually implemented several of your techniques in my own practice. My father looked surprised. You've read her research? Of course. Dr. Mitchell is well known in trauma surgery circles. Her work on emergency cardiac care has probably saved more lives than any single physician in the last decade. After Dr. Harrison left, my father sat quietly for a long time. What are you thinking about? I asked. I'm thinking about all the dinner parties where I've had to listen to my friends brag about their children. Bob's son made partner at a law firm. Helen's daughter married a surgeon. Frank's boy just bought a house in Winnetka. Dad! And the whole time, my daughter was saving lives and revolutionizing medicine, and I was embarrassed to talk about her because she worked at a public hospital. You were embarrassed by me? He looked ashamed. Not embarrassed, exactly, but I didn't know how to brag about someone whose success didn't fit the template I understood. I knew how to talk about money and status. I didn't know how to talk about saving lives. You could have asked me to explain it. I should have. I should have asked you a lot of things over the years. On day 5, Janet stopped by during her shift break. She'd been checking on me regularly, and I'd grown fond of her direct manner and obvious compassion. How are you feeling, Dr. Mitchell? Much better. I should be able to go home tomorrow. Good. And how are things with your father? I glanced at my dad, who was reading another of my research papers. Better than they've been in years. Janet smiled. I'm glad. You know, after that first night, your father asked me to recommend some medical journals so he could understand your work better. You did! My father looked up from the journal. I subscribe to 3 different medical publications. I have a lot of catching up to do. That's wonderful, Janet said. Dr. Mitchell, I hope you don't mind, but I told your father about the scholarship fund you established at Northwestern's nursing school. My father's head snapped up. You have a scholarship fund here? I sighed. It's not a big deal. I just thought nursing students from low-income families could use some help with tuition. How much? He asked. How much what? How much have you donated to the scholarship fund? I was quiet for a moment. Over the past 5 years, about $200,000. My father stared at me. $200,000? It's important to me that financial barriers don't prevent good people from becoming nurses. Nurses like Janet are the backbone of healthcare. Janet beamed. 3 of my nieces have benefited from that scholarship fund. They're all working as nurses now because of Dr. Mitchell's generosity. After Janet left, my father was unusually quiet. Dad, are you okay? I'm just trying to process all of this. You've donated more money to charity in 5 years than most people make in their entire careers. You've saved over 1,000 lives. You've revolutionized emergency medicine. You've trained hundreds of doctors. And I've spent years telling you that you weren't successful enough. You didn't know. I should have known. I should have asked. I should have paid attention. He paused, then said, Sarah, I want to do something to make up for all the years I didn't understand or support your work. Dad, you don't need to. Yes, I do. I want to establish a research fund in your name. For emergency medicine research. How much would make a real difference? I was stunned. Dad, that's not necessary. It is necessary. For me. I need to do something to show that I understand now, that I'm proud of what you've accomplished. He leaned forward. How much? I don't know. Research funding is always needed. Equipment, clinical trials, fellowship programs. It could be anything from $50,000 to $1 million. I nearly choked. Dad, that's way too much. It's not too much. It's not nearly enough to make up for 35 years of not seeing who you really are, but it's a start. He pulled out his phone. I'm calling my financial advisor right now. Dad, wait. But he was already dialing. Tom, it's Richard Mitchell. I need to liquidate some investments. I want to establish a research fund. Yes, immediately. $1 million to start. As I listened to my father arrange to donate $1 million to emergency medicine research, I realized that something fundamental had shifted between us. He wasn't just saying he was proud of me, he was putting his money where his mouth was, supporting the work I dedicated my life to in the most concrete way possible. When he hung up the phone, he looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, not just pride, but genuine respect. The Richard and Sarah Mitchell Emergency Medicine Research Fund, he said. It has a nice ring to it. You don't have to put your name on it, Dad. I want to. I want everyone to know that I'm proud to be your father. And I want to make sure that other doctors have the resources to continue the work you've started. I felt tears streaming down my face, not from pain this time, but from a mixture of gratitude and relief that I hadn't felt in decades. My father wasn't just accepting my choices. He was embracing them, supporting them, making them his own. Thank you, Dad. This means more to me than you know." "It means everything to me too," he said, reaching over to squeeze my hand gently. "I've wasted so many years being disappointed in the wrong things. I don't want to waste any more time." On my last day at Northwestern Memorial, Dr. Harrison stopped by with my discharge papers and some unexpected news. "Dr. Mitchell, I hope you won't mind, but I've taken the liberty of reaching out to some colleagues about your case." "My case?" "Not your medical case, your professional reputation. It seems that news of your accident has spread through the medical community, and there's been an outpouring of support that I think you should know about." He handed me a thick folder. "These are letters from doctors, nurses, and patients from around the country, people whose lives you've touched through your work." I opened the folder with trembling hands. The first letter was from Dr. Amanditchin, a former resident I'd trained who was now working at a hospital in Seattle. "Dr. Mitchell," it read, "I heard about your accident and wanted you to know that everything I know about emergency medicine, I learned from you. You didn't just teach me medical procedures. You taught me how to see each patient as a whole person, not just a collection of symptoms. Because of your mentorship, I've been able to save lives I never would have been able to save otherwise. You are the reason I became the doctor I am today." There were dozens of similar letters. Patients thanking me for saving their lives or the lives of their family members. Medical students I'd taught who were now practicing physicians themselves. Nurses I'd worked with who credited me with teaching them advanced life support techniques. My father read over my shoulder, his eyes growing wider with each letter. "Sarah," he said quietly, "do you realize what this is?" "What do you mean?" "This is your legacy. These aren't just letters, they're proof of the impact you've had on the world. Every person who wrote one of these letters represents dozens or hundreds of other people whose lives have been saved because of your influence." Janet appeared in the doorway. "Dr. Mitchell, I hate to interrupt, but there's something happening downstairs that I think you should see." "What kind of something?" "It's better if you see for yourself. Are you well enough to take a wheelchair ride?" My father helped me into a wheelchair, and Janet pushed me toward the elevator. As we descended to the main floor, I could hear something unusual, a lot of voices, almost like a crowd. When the elevator doors opened, I gasped. The entire main lobby of Northwestern Memorial was filled with people. Doctors in white coats, nurses in scrubs, patients in hospital gowns, and dozens of people in regular clothes, all applauding. "What is this?" I whispered. Dr. Harrison appeared beside my wheelchair. "Word got out that you were being discharged today. People wanted to say thank you." As Janet wheeled me through the crowd, people called out to me, "Thank you for saving my father. You trained my daughter. She's a doctor now because of you. Your research protocols saved my husband's life. You operated on me 3 years ago at St. Mary's. I'm alive because of you." I was crying openly now, overwhelmed by the outpouring of gratitude and support. My father walked beside my wheelchair, his own eyes moist as he witnessed the impact his daughter had made on so many lives. Near the exit, a young woman approached with a small child in tow. "Dr. Mitchell, I'm Maria Santos. You probably don't remember me, but you saved my son's life 2 years ago at St. Mary's. He'd been hit by a car, and they said he might not make it." I looked at the healthy, smiling little boy and felt my heart swell. "I remember you, Miguel. You were very brave." "Mama says you're a hero," Miguel said shyly. "Your mama is very smart," I said, ruffling his hair. Maria turned to my father. "Sir, I don't know if you're family, but you should know that your Dr. Mitchell didn't just save my son's life. When she found out we couldn't afford the follow-up care, she arranged for everything to be covered by the hospital's charity fund. And when Miguel was scared to come back for his checkups, she would meet us personally to make sure he was okay." My father knelt down to Miguel's level. "She's my daughter," he said proudly, "and I'm just learning how amazing she really is." As we finally made it outside, my father helped me into his car, not the BMW I'd expected, but a modest sedan. "New car?" I asked. "I traded in the BMW last week," he said. "Seemed a bit excessive, considering what I've learned about what really matters." On the drive to my apartment, we talked about the future. "I want to be involved in your work," he said. "Not just the research fund, but really involved. I want to understand what you do, support it however I can." "Dad, you don't have to change your whole life because of this." "I'm not changing my life. I'm finally starting to live it properly. I've spent 68 years focused on accumulating wealth and status, and for what? So I could be the kind of man who would let his own daughter die because she didn't meet his definition of success. You weren't really going to let me die. I came close enough that it scares me. If Janet hadn't stepped in, if she hadn't forced me to see who you really are. He shuddered. I almost lost the most important thing in my life because I was too stubborn and narrow-minded to see its value. We pulled up in front of my apartment building, a modest but comfortable place in a neighborhood that was more diverse than wealthy. Sarah, my father said as he helped me out of the car, I have one more question. What's that? Would you be willing to have dinner with me once a week? Not to argue about your life choices, but just to be father and daughter. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. I'd like that very much. And maybe you could tell me more about your work. Help me understand how I could support it better. I'd love to. As we walked slowly toward my building, my father said, You know, I've been thinking about what Janet said about you being a hero. I'm not a hero, Dad. I'm just a doctor doing my job. No, he said firmly. You're exactly what a hero should be. You dedicate your life to saving others. You give away your money to help people in need. You train the next generation of lifesavers, and you do it all without expecting recognition or reward. He paused at the entrance to my building. I spent your whole life trying to make you into someone you were never meant to be. But you became who you were meant to be anyway, despite my interference. That makes you not just a hero, but a remarkable person. 3 months later, I was back at work at St. Mary's, fully recovered from my injuries. The Richard and Sarah Mitchell Emergency Medicine Research Fund had already funded 2 new studies on cardiac arrest protocols and established fellowship programs for 3 young doctors. My father visited the hospital every week, not to criticize or judge, but to learn. He shadowed me during some of my shifts, watched me work with residents, and gradually began to understand the world I'd chosen. One evening, as we finished dinner at a restaurant near the hospital, he said, Sarah, I have something to tell you. What's that? I've been bragging about you to everyone who will listen. My golf partners are probably sick of hearing about Dr. Sarah Mitchell and her groundbreaking research. I laughed. You've been bragging about me? Constantly. Bob mentioned his son making partner again last week, and I spent 20 minutes telling him about your latest paper on trauma protocols. I think I wore him out. Dad, I know it's probably too little, too late, but I want you to know that I tell everyone I meet that my daughter is the most successful person I know. Not because of money or status, but because she's dedicated her life to something that actually matters. I reached across the table and took his hand. It's not too late, Dad. It's exactly the right time. As we walked back to his car, I reflected on how much had changed since that terrible night when I'd heard him tell the medical staff that I wasn't worth saving. The accident had nearly killed me, but it had brought us back to life, both of us. I'd spent years trying to earn my father's approval, and when I'd finally given up, I'd found something better, his understanding, his respect, and his love. Not the conditional love that depended on me meeting his expectations, but the unconditional love of a father who finally saw his daughter for who she really was. And my father had discovered that success wasn't just about accumulating wealth and status. It was about making a difference in the world, leaving it better than you found it, and being proud of the person you'd become rather than just the things you'd acquired. The night I'd nearly died had become the night we'd both learned to truly live. 6 months later, at the annual Emergency Medicine Conference in Chicago, I was giving the keynote address on new cardiac arrest protocols when I spotted my father in the audience. He was sitting in the front row, beaming with pride as I discussed research funded by the foundation he'd established. After my presentation, as doctors from around the country approached to discuss the research and its implications, my father waited patiently in the back of the room. When the crowd finally thinned out, he approached with a smile that I'd never seen before, pure, uncomplicated pride. That was incredible, he said. I understood maybe half of what you said, but I could tell everyone else was hanging on every word. It's pretty technical stuff, I admitted. Dr. Mitchell, a young woman approached us. I'm Dr. Jennifer Walsh from Boston Children's Hospital. I just wanted to thank you. Your cardiac protocols saved a 6-year-old boy last month. His parents wanted me to give you this. She handed me a crayon drawing of a heart with "Thank you, Dr. Mitchell" written in a child's handwriting. My father looked at the drawing, then at me, then back at the drawing. "Every day," he said quietly. "Every single day, you make a difference like this." "Not every day," I said, "but often enough to make it all worthwhile." As we left the conference center together, my father said, "Sarah, I have a confession to make." "What's that?" "I've started volunteering at the free clinic you support downtown." I stopped walking. "You have?" "Just administrative stuff, helping with insurance paperwork, organizing files. Nothing medical. But I wanted to see firsthand the kind of work you support with your donations." "Dad, that's wonderful. What do you think of it?" "I think I've learned more about real success in the past 6 months volunteering there than I learned in 40 years of practicing law." We walked in comfortable silence for a few blocks before he spoke again. "You know what the best part of all this has been?" "What?" "Getting to know my daughter. Really know her. Not the version of her I wanted her to be, but the remarkable woman she actually is." I smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the spring weather. "I've enjoyed getting to know my father, too. The man behind all the expectations and demands. He's actually pretty great. Think we can make up for lost time?" "Dad, we're not making up for lost time. We're making the most of the time we have left." As we reached his car, he turned to me one more time. "Sarah, I need you to know something." "What's that?" "That night in the hospital, when I said those terrible things about you not being worth saving, that wasn't really me talking. That was fear and pride and a lifetime of measuring everything wrong. The real me, the father who loves you unconditionally, was buried under all of that." "I know, Dad. But you need to know that I would never, ever let anything happen to you. You're the most precious thing in my life, and I'm sorry it took almost losing you for me to remember that." I hugged him tightly, careful of my still healing ribs. "I love you too, Dad. And I'm proud to be your daughter, all of me, exactly as I am. And I'm proud to be your father, not because of what you've accomplished, but because of who you are." As I watched him drive away, I realized that the accident had given us both something we'd been missing for years, the chance to see each other clearly, without the distortion of expectations and disappointments and misunderstandings. I was still Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Chief of Emergency Medicine, researcher, teacher, and lifesaver. But now I was also something I'd never been before, a daughter whose father truly understood and appreciated who she was. And that felt like the greatest success of all. 1 year later, I stood at the podium in Northwestern Memorial's main auditorium, addressing a crowd of medical professionals, patients, and family members who had gathered for the dedication of the new Richard and Sarah Mitchell Emergency Medicine Research Center. The center would house state-of-the-art simulation labs for training emergency medicine residents, research facilities for developing new life-saving protocols, and offices for the fellowship program that would train the next generation of emergency physicians. My father sat in the front row, wearing a pin on his lapel that read, "Proud father of Dr. Sarah Mitchell." Beside him sat Janet, who had become not just a colleague but a friend, and Dr. Harrison, who had helped save my life that night and had become the medical director of the new research center. "This center represents more than just a building or a program," I said to the gathered crowd. "It represents the belief that every life has value, that every patient deserves our best effort, and that the work of saving lives is the most important work any of us can do." I paused, looking at my father. "It also represents the power of understanding, forgiveness, and the courage to change. Sometimes the most important healing that happens in a hospital isn't physical, it's emotional and spiritual." After the ceremony, as people mingled and toured the new facilities, my father approached me. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small wrapped package from his pocket. I opened it to find a simple silver bracelet engraved with the words, "Dr. Sarah Mitchell, my hero, my daughter." "Dad, it's beautiful. I wanted you to have something to remind you that you have at least one person who thinks you're the most successful person in the world, exactly as you are." I put on the bracelet and hugged him tightly. "Thank you for giving me the chance to become the father you deserved," he whispered in my ear. "Thank you for finally letting me be the daughter I am." As the evening wound down and people began to leave, I stood with my father looking out the window at the Chicago skyline, the city where I'd built my career and where we'd rebuilt our relationship. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. I'm thinking about that night a year ago when I was lying in the trauma bay and heard you say I wasn't worth saving. He winced. I still can't believe I said that. I'm glad you did. He looked at me in surprise. Glad? If you hadn't said it, Janet never would have stepped in to defend me. I never would have heard all those things about my work and its impact. You never would have learned who I really am. We might have gone on for years with the same misunderstandings and disappointments. I smiled at him. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes. Are you saying my being a terrible father was actually a good thing? I'm saying that your willingness to admit you were wrong and change was a very good thing. The terrible father part, we could have done without. He laughed, a sound I'd grown to love hearing over the past year. So what's next for Dr. Sarah Mitchell? He asked. More of the same, I hope. Saving lives, training doctors, pushing the boundaries of what's possible in emergency medicine, and having dinner with my father every Tuesday night. And what's next for Richard Mitchell? Learning more about medicine, so I can be a better advocate for your work, volunteering more at the free clinic, and trying to be the father you deserve for whatever time we have left. As we walked toward the exit together, I realized that the story that had begun with such pain and misunderstanding had become one of redemption, recognition, and love. The father who had once thought I wasn't worth saving now understood that I'd spent my entire career proving that everyone was worth saving, including him, including us, including the relationship we'd nearly lost forever. In the end, the most important life I'd ever saved wasn't in an operating room or emergency bay. It was the life of the relationship between a father and daughter who had forgotten how to see the best in each other until one terrible night when the truth finally set us both free. And that, I realized, was the most successful outcome of all. If you liked the story, leave your opinion in the comments and, of course, leave a like and subscribe. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. Big hug and see you soon.